The cruelest lies are not always shouted. Sometimes they are spoken politely in a courtroom, by people wearing expensive clothes, while everyone pretends not to notice a woman being erased from her own life. Emily Carter sat alone at the far end of the polished oak table, her hands folded over a navy handbag that had a worn brass clasp and a tiny scratch near the handle. It was the kind of bag no one in the Whitmore family would have looked at twice, which was precisely why Vanessa Blake kept looking at it with that thin, satisfied smile. Across the aisle, Nathan Whitmore adjusted his silver cuff links as if the entire hearing were nothing more than an inconvenient appointment between lunch at the club and a call with his investment broker. He wore confidence like a tailored suit, dark, immaculate, and carefully chosen to hide what it could not fix. Beside him sat Vanessa, blonde, glossy, and composed in a cream dress that looked designed for cameras that were not there. Behind them, Nathan's mother, Patricia Whitmore, whispered something to her husband and gave Emily the same look she used to give the household staff when a glass had been placed half an inch too far to the left. The courtroom in Fairfield County was cool enough to make Emily's fingers stiff. Outside, late October rain streaked the tall windows, turning the parking lot lights into blurred gold lines on the glass. Inside, everything smelled faintly of old paper, floor wax, and expensive wool. Judge Margaret Collins had not entered yet, so the room had settled into that strange pretrial murmur where people say the things they are too cowardly to repeat once the record begins. Vanessa leaned slightly toward Emily, her voice low but not low enough. "You don't deserve a doormat from that house, let alone the deed." A few people behind Nathan gave a soft, careful laugh, the kind of laugh people use when they want to belong to power. Nathan did not laugh. That would have been too obvious, and Nathan had always preferred cruelty dressed as restraint. He simply looked down at the papers in front of him and let Vanessa's words sit in the air. That was worse. Emily felt the sentence land, not like a knife, but like a door being closed from the outside. She had heard versions of it for years. You contributed nothing. You were lucky to be there. You confused marriage with ownership. You mistook kindness for entitlement. Human beings had a remarkable talent for repeating lies until they sounded like architecture. Across the room, Nathan's attorney, William Mercer, arranged his legal pads into a perfect stack. He had silver hair, rimless glasses, and the relaxed posture of a man who had spent 30 years teaching frightened people that truth mattered less than who could afford better paper. Emily's own attorney had not arrived yet. That fact had clearly pleased the Whitmores. Patricia glanced at the empty chair beside Emily and raised one eyebrow, as though the absence confirmed everything she had ever believed. Emily did not explain. She did not turn around. She did not defend herself. 5 years ago, she might have. 5 years ago, she would have tried to make them understand that love had made her generous, not stupid. That loyalty had made her quiet, not powerless. That the house on Briar Lane had not survived because Nathan Whitmore was brilliant, but because she had signed away the last piece of her father's memory to save it. But 5 years ago, Emily still believed people were embarrassed by their own unfairness. Now she knew better. Some people polished it and called it legacy. The heavy courtroom doors opened, and the bailiff stepped in. "All rise." Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Vanessa stood with the graceful impatience of someone waiting to collect what she had already mentally decorated. Nathan rose beside her, face calm, jaw tight. Emily stood last, slowly, one hand still resting on her handbag. Inside it, beneath a folded tissue, a house key she no longer used, and a receipt from a coffee shop 3 blocks away, was a photocopy of the document no one in that room believed still mattered. Not the whole truth. Not yet. Just enough to remind her why she had come. Judge Collins entered, black robe moving like a shadow across the bench. She was in her early 60s, with sharp eyes and the weary expression of someone who had watched rich families mistake inheritance for morality far too many times. Everyone sat. The clerk called the matter Whitmore versus Carter, petition to quiet title and remove adverse claim. The words sounded clean, almost harmless, as legal words often do when they are designed to cover something ugly. Nathan wanted her name removed. Vanessa wanted the house cleared. The Whitmores wanted the past corrected into a version that flattered them. Emily looked straight ahead as William Mercer stood, buttoned his jacket, and began. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. Mrs. Carter has no equitable claim to the Briar Lane property. She was once married to Mr. Whitmore. Yes, but marriage alone does not create ownership. Vanessa's smile deepened. Patricia lowered her gaze as if in prayer, though Emily doubted gratitude counted when it was aimed at someone else's humiliation. Mercer continued, smooth and certain. The property has always belonged to the Whitmore family in substance, maintenance, and intent. Mrs. Carter's current position is, regrettably, an attempt to leverage emotional history into financial benefit. Emily felt every face shift toward her. The old room seemed to lean in, hungry for her reaction. She gave them nothing. Because beneath all their certainty, beneath Vanessa's perfume and Nathan's polished silence and Mercer's careful language, one stubborn fact remained hidden in the county records like a seed under frozen ground. They could claim she deserved nothing. They could call her bitter, desperate, confused, and greedy. They could rewrite the marriage, the money, the years, and every sacrifice she had made inside that house. But they had forgotten one small, inconvenient thing. The deed still carried her signature. For one suspended second after Mercer finished speaking, Emily heard nothing but the rain against the high windows. It tapped softly, persistently, like a patient finger on glass. Judge Collins made a note on her yellow legal pad, then looked over the top of her reading glasses at Emily's side of the table. The empty chair beside her seemed larger than it had a minute earlier. Vanessa noticed it too. She tilted her head, allowing concern to arrange itself across her face with theatrical precision. Your Honor, Mercer continued, before the judge could ask, we understand Mrs. Carter may be representing herself today. While we respect her right to do so, we would prefer not to prolong this matter unnecessarily. There it was, dressed in professional language, the same old assumption that Emily was alone because she was helpless, not because she had learned the value of timing. Nathan finally looked at her then. His expression was not angry. Anger would have given him too much humanity. It was pity, or what he wanted everyone to mistake for pity. Emily remembered that look from the last year of their marriage, the soft, downward curve of his mouth when she asked about bank statements, the tired sigh when she questioned why Vanessa was calling after 10 at night, the gentle hand on her shoulder when he told her she was imagining patterns because she was lonely. Expected, as if trying to decide whether the quiet woman at the end of the table was frightened or simply finished performing fear. I will allow 10 minutes, the judge said. No more. In the meantime, Mr. Mercer may proceed with background. Mercer gave a short nod, though his lips had thinned. He stepped to the lectern and began constructing the Whitmore version of history, brick by expensive brick. Briar Lane, he explained, had been purchased decades earlier by Nathan's grandparents through a family trust. It had passed through internal arrangements, maintained by Whitmore Resources, renovated by Whitmore Contractors, preserved as a family asset. Been 29, newly married, still foolish enough to believe that devotion could translate across class lines if spoken gently enough. She had brought no family name worth mentioning, no trust fund, no summer house on Nantucket. What she had brought was a small inheritance from her father, a stubborn work ethic, and a belief in Nathan so complete it now embarrassed her to remember. In those days, Nathan was not the polished man sitting across from her in court. He was restless, brilliant in flashes, terrified beneath the surface. His first real estate fund had missed projections by nearly 40%. A lender had begun circling Briar Lane because Nathan had quietly tied part of the property to a business loan he swore was temporary. Emily had found the notice folded inside a drawer in his study, beneath golf invitations and unopened bank envelopes. When she asked him about it, his face had gone gray. Not angry, not defensive, afraid. My family cannot know, he had whispered that night in the kitchen, while snow pressed against the dark windows. My mother would never forgive me. Emily had believed the tremor in his voice meant honesty. She had mistaken need for intimacy, which is how many disasters get a respectable beginning. Emily had not gone looking for Nathan's weakness that winter. She had gone looking for receipts for a plumber because the pipes in the West guest bathroom had frozen again, because Briar Lane, for all its stone columns and old money grandeur, was always one cold snap away from proving that rich houses could be just as fragile as poor ones, only more expensive to repair. The envelope had been tucked beneath a stack of unopened statements, thick cream paper with the lender's logo pressed into the corner. Past due. Final notice. Collateral review pending. The words had looked impossible at first, like a foreign language slipped into the familiar mess of Nathan's desk. When she carried it downstairs, Nathan was standing at the kitchen island in sweatpants and a cashmere sweater, staring into a glass of water as though it contained an answer. He did not deny it. That was what frightened her most. Nathan always denied things first. He denied being tired, denied being worried, denied that his father's praise mattered, denied that Patricia's approval still governed him like weather. But that night, he only sat down slowly and put his face in his hands. The house was not supposed to be at risk, he told her. It was temporary. A bridge loan. A liquidity issue. Words men used when they wanted panic to sound educated. His fund had been stretched thin after 2 commercial properties in Stamford failed to lease on schedule. He had personally guaranteed more than he should have. Briar Lane had been used as supporting collateral because he thought the refinancing would close before anyone noticed. Anyone, in this case, meant his parents. The bank had noticed first, which was root of reality, but reality had never been impressed by family names. Emily remembered standing barefoot on the cold kitchen floor, the marble biting through her skin, while snow tapped against the French doors. She had asked him how much. Nathan had not answered right away. Then he said the number so quietly she almost missed it. $480,000 to stop the immediate action, more to stabilize the loan afterward. It was an obscene amount of money to say aloud in a kitchen where Patricia once complained that the caterer had used the wrong shade of linen napkin. Emily should have walked away from the conversation. She should have called an attorney, a financial advisor, maybe even a sensible friend with no romantic investment in Nathan Whitmore's trembling hands. Instead, she thought of her father's apartment in New Haven, the one he had left her after 32 years of teaching high school history and saving coupons in a coffee tin above the refrigerator. It was small, 1,200 square feet, with creaking floors and windows that rattled when buses passed, but it had been his. It had been the last physical proof that someone had loved her without needing her to perform. Nathan did not ask her to sell it. That was the part that made the memory complicated. He simply sat there, ashamed and silent, and let her offer. The next morning, she called a broker. Within 3 weeks, the apartment was listed. Within 6, it was under contract. By March, the proceeds, after taxes and closing costs, had been wired into an escrow account arranged by Robert Hale, the Whitmore family's longtime property attorney. Emily could still see Hale's office on the 3rd floor of a brick building off Post Road, the brass lamp on his desk, the smell of leather chairs and stale coffee, the way he looked over his glasses at Nathan when the documents were prepared. If Mrs. Whitmore's separate funds are being used to cure the default and preserve the property, he had said, her interest needs to be reflected in the deed. Nathan's face had tightened. Not with anger, not exactly. With embarrassment. He looked at Emily before he looked at Hale, and that tiny movement had told her everything. He wanted saving. He did not want witnesses. Is that necessary? Nathan asked. Robert Hale rested both hands on the file. It is not only necessary. It is clean. Clean. Emily had liked that word then. It sounded honest, protective, decent. So her name was added. Emily and Carter Whitmore, as co-owner, her signature placed beneath Nathan's on a corrected deed recorded with the county. Nathan held her hand in the parking lot afterward, his eyes bright with relief. One day, he whispered, I will make sure everyone knows what you did. She had smiled because she believed him. That was the tragedy of it. Not that he lied beautifully, but that she had loved him enough to help him become the kind of man who could afford better lies. Back in the courtroom, Mercer was still speaking, polishing the family history until it shone with omissions. Emily watched Nathan from across the aisle. He was looking at the judge, not at her. That was how she knew he remembered the office too. Mercer's voice continued to move through the courtroom, calm as a guided tour through a house, where every locked door concealed a different version of the truth. At the time of the divorce, he said, Mrs. Carter accepted a negotiated settlement and vacated the Briar Lane residence voluntarily. For 5 years, she made no effort to occupy the property, contribute to maintenance, or assert any meaningful control over it. Only now, after Mr. Whitmore's remarriage and planned refinancing, has she resurfaced with this claim. Voluntarily. Emily almost admired the word for its nerve. She had left Briar Lane with 2 suitcases, a cardboard box of books, and a check that Nathan's attorneys called fair because they had measured fairness with his ruler. She had signed the divorce agreement in a conference room that smelled of toner and lemon polish, while Nathan sat across from her looking wounded by the inconvenience of her pain. His lawyers had placed documents in front of her, so quickly the pages blurred. Spousal support waived. Personal property divided. No further claims arising from the marriage except as expressly preserved by law. That phrase had seemed meaningless then, a little trapdoor of language tucked into the larger machinery. She had been too exhausted to climb inside it and look around. Nathan had counted on that. People always underestimate exhaustion as a legal strategy, but it works beautifully on anyone who has been taught to apologize for needing time. Judge Collins listened without expression. Vanessa sat very still, but her hands betrayed her. One finger tapped lightly against the clasp of her designer purse, a small nervous rhythm beneath the polished surface. She had entered the courtroom expecting Emily to look ruined. Instead, Emily looked tired. Yes, but not defeated. There is a difference. Ruin begs to be witnessed. Tiredness waits. Mercer turned a page. My client has invested substantial resources in the property since the divorce. New roofing, updated security systems, landscaping, insurance, property taxes. Mrs. Carter has paid none of those expenses. Patricia nodded from the second row as if property taxes were a moral sacrament. Emily remembered the first year after she left, when she rented a 600-square-foot apartment over a florist in Norwalk. Every morning at 5:30, refrigerated delivery trucks rattled beneath her bedroom window, and the scent of roses mixed with diesel fumes came up through the floorboards. She worked remotely for a design firm during the day and took bookkeeping jobs at night, teaching herself to breathe in a life that no longer had. Marble floors or Patricia's voice echoing down hallways. She did not pay for Briar Lane's landscaping because she was paying to survive. She did not update its security system because she was rebuilding the part of herself Nathan had made unsafe. She did not fight for the house immediately because sometimes a woman chooses peace before justice, not because she has no claim, but because she has no strength left to hold it. Vanessa finally leaned toward Nathan and whispered, but the courtroom had quieted enough for Emily to hear pieces of it. This is ridiculous. She is dragging this out. Nathan murmured something back, too low to catch. His eyes flicked toward Emily's handbag again. That was new. A small crack in the marble. Mercer invited Vanessa to speak in support of the petition, and she rose as if stepping into flattering light. She moved to the lectern with practiced grace, her cream dress immaculate, her blonde hair tucked behind one ear. Your Honor, she began, voice soft enough to sound reasonable. I understand divorce can leave people with complicated feelings. I do. But this house is Nathan's family home. It represents generations of work, tradition, and responsibility. Emily lived there during her marriage, and I do not dismiss that. But living somewhere does not mean you built it. It does not mean you own it. It certainly does not mean you get to appear years later and interfere with a family trying to move forward. The words were polished and poisonous. A few listeners nodded because society has an embarrassing weakness for cruelty delivered in a calm voice. Vanessa continued, growing bolder. Nathan has been generous. More generous than many men would have been. But at some point, compassion becomes enabling. Emily needs to accept that this chapter is closed. Emily watched her carefully, not because Vanessa mattered as much as she believed, but because Vanessa was speaking from inside a house built on information Nathan had edited. She thought Emily wanted the chandelier, the driveway, the wine cellar, the Thanksgiving table where Patricia assigned seats like military ranks. She thought this was envy. That made it easier for her. Envy is simple. Truth is inconvenient. Judge Collins tapped her pen once. Mrs. Blake Whitmore, are you aware of the recorded ownership history of the property? Vanessa hesitated just long enough for the room to notice. I am aware that it belongs to my husband's family. The judge's face did not change. That was not my question. Nathan shifted in his chair. Mercer stood quickly. Your Honor, Mrs. Whitmore is not here as a title expert. Then she should be careful not to testify as one, Judge Collins replied. The silence that followed was small, but satisfying in the way only precise public correction can be. Emily lowered her eyes to hide the flicker of emotion that rose in her chest. Not triumph. Not yet. Something steadier. Recognition. For years, every room had bent toward Nathan's version of events. Finally, one room had resisted. At that moment, The heavy doors at the back opened again. A man in a dark overcoat stepped inside, rain shining on his shoulders, a sealed envelope tucked beneath one arm. Robert Hale paused just inside the courtroom, older than Emily remembered, thinner, with the same wire-framed glasses and the same grave, careful eyes. Nathan saw him first. The color drained from his face so subtly that anyone who did not know him might have missed it. Emily did not miss it. Neither did Judge Collins. Robert walked down the aisle without hurry, as if he had learned long ago that the truth did not need to rush. It only needed to arrive. Robert Hale did not look at Nathan first. That was what made the moment feel dangerous. He walked past the Whitmore side of the courtroom as though they were furniture, acknowledged Judge Collins with a small, respectful nod, and took the empty chair beside Emily. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of his overcoat, and a few silver strands of hair clung to his forehead, but his hands were steady when he placed the sealed envelope on the table. Emily felt the air change around her. Not dramatically, not with music or thunder, because real turning points rarely come with such generosity. They arrive in ordinary materials: paper, ink, a county seal, an old man who still remembers where the truth was filed. "My apologies, Your Honor," Hale said, rising slowly. His voice had aged, but it retained the dry precision Emily remembered from his office years ago. The certified copy took longer than expected. The clerk had to retrieve the original recording index from archival storage. Mercer's expression hardened. "Your Honor, I object to the introduction of documents not properly disclosed." Judge Collins looked at him. "Mr. Mercer, you just represented this matter as a question of recorded title. If Mr. Hale has certified title records, I am inclined to review them." Mercer's mouth opened, then closed. A lawyer who dislikes records is a very specific kind of magician, the kind who prefers the audience not inspect the hat. Nathan leaned toward Mercer, whispering fast now, his composure beginning to fray at the edges. Vanessa watched Robert Hale with the suspicion of someone seeing a locked door appear in a room she thought she owned. "Mr. Hale," Judge Collins said, "state your role for the record." Hale stood at the lectern. "Robert Arthur Hale, attorney at law, retired from active family representation but still licensed in the state of Connecticut. For 38 years, I handled certain property matters for Whitmore Holdings and members of the Whitmore family. In March of 2016, I prepared and recorded a corrective warranty deed related to the property at 18 Briar Lane, Westport, Connecticut." The room became so quiet Emily could hear Patricia shift her pearls against her collarbone. Nathan's father, Charles Whitmore, who had been silent all morning, lowered his chin as if trying to make himself less visible. There it was. The year, the month, the exact door opening. Mercer rose again. "Your Honor, this testimony may concern privileged communications." Hale turned his head just enough to look at him. "The recorded deed is public record, Mr. Mercer. Privilege does not make public documents disappear, no matter how fond certain families may be of the idea." A tiny sound moved through the gallery, quickly swallowed. Judge Collins did not smile, but something in her eyes sharpened. "Proceed carefully, Mr. Hale." Hale nodded. The property had been pledged in connection with a private business obligation undertaken by Mr. Nathan Whitmore. At that time, a default required immediate cure to prevent further action against the property. Funds used to cure that default came from Mrs. Emily Carter Whitmore's separate inheritance. Vanessa's face changed then, not fully, but enough. Her confidence did not vanish. It recalculated. Nathan stared at the table. Emily remembered that posture too. The lowered eyes, the set jaw, the stillness of a man waiting for someone else to rescue him from facts. Hale continued. "Because those funds were not marital earnings, and because the amount materially preserved the property, I advised that Mrs. Whitmore's ownership interest be reflected in the recorded title." Both parties agreed. Both parties signed. The corrected deed was recorded with the county. Mercer's voice came out thinner than before. "That does not establish present control." Judge Collins raised one hand. "It establishes that your opening statement may have been incomplete." That sentence landed with the quiet force of a dropped gavel, even though no gavel moved. Emily kept her eyes on the envelope. She did not want to look at Nathan yet. Not because she was afraid, but because some moments deserved to be protected from the people who made them necessary. Judge Collins extended her hand. "Let me see the document." Hale broke the seal, removed a certified copy, and handed it to the clerk, who passed it up to the bench. The judge read in silence. One page, then the next. Her expression revealed nothing, which made everyone else reveal more. Vanessa gripped the edge of the table. Patricia stopped pretending to be bored. Mercer removed his glasses, cleaned them, and put them back on, as if the problem might be the lenses and not the universe refusing to cooperate. Nathan finally looked at Emily. For the first time that morning, he did not look pitying. He looked exactly as he had in that kitchen years ago, when the final notice lay between them and the snow fell outside Briar Lane. Afraid, exposed, and faintly resentful that she had remembered what he preferred buried. Judge Collins looked up from the deed. The court will take notice of the certified record. The document lists Nathan Whitmore and Emily and Carter Whitmore as co-owners of the Briar Lane property. No one laughed this time. Not Vanessa, official but already everywhere, her perfume lingering on Nathan's scarf, her name appearing on his phone whenever he turned it face down too quickly. Emily remembered the walls of the conference room, gray and windowless, as if the building itself understood that people should not have to watch the sky while signing away the life they thought would last. Mercer had been there too, younger by 5 years, but already polished to a shine. He had explained the settlement with the bored patience of a man describing a weather report. The furniture, the accounts, the vehicles, the support waiver, the confidentiality clause. Nathan had wanted clean lines. That was what he called it. Clean lines. No mess. No public ugliness. No lingering attachments. He had offered her a payment that sounded large until rent, taxes, and attorney fees began eating it alive. He had let her keep her father's watch, 2 boxes of books, and the framed photograph from their wedding because, as he said softly in the elevator afterward, "I am not trying to be cruel, Em." People who say that are often standing directly inside the cruelty, rearranging the furniture. At the time, Emily had not asked about Briar Lane's deed. She had not asked because she thought the house had already taken enough from her. She wanted distance more than marble. She wanted sleep more than chandeliers. She wanted one morning where she could open her eyes and not feel Nathan's disappointment waiting at the foot of the bed like another person. So she left. She left the key on the kitchen island, beside the blue ceramic bowl she had bought in Vermont, the one Patricia once called charming in the tone people reserve for stray dogs. For years, she believed leaving meant surrendering. It was not until much later that she learned the law had kept a quieter memory than her heart. "Mrs. Carter," Judge Collins said, drawing her back to the present, "did you ever sign a quitclaim deed transferring your interest in the Briar Lane property to Mr. Whitmore or to any Whitmore family entity?" Emily stood. Her voice felt unfamiliar in the room, steadier than the pulse beating in her throat. "No, Your Honor." "Were you ever asked to sign?" "1." Emily's eyes moved to Nathan. He looked away. "No, Your Honor." Mercer rose. "Your Honor, my client understood the divorce settlement to resolve all matters between the parties." Judge Collins looked at Nathan directly. "Mr. Whitmore can testify to his understanding if necessary. Understanding is not recording." That sentence seemed to settle over the room like dust on polished wood. Vanessa turned toward Nathan, and for the first time all morning, there was no performance in her expression. Only calculation giving way to confusion. "Nathan," she whispered, not quite softly enough. "What is she talking about?" Nathan did not answer. Patricia leaned forward, her pearl earrings trembling slightly. Charles Whitmore closed his eyes for 1 second, and Emily wondered if he had known. If somewhere inside the sealed vault of family embarrassment there had always been a copy of this truth. Robert Hale removed another document from his folder. "There is also the matter of attempted filing," he said. Mercer stiffened. "That is outside the scope of today's petition." "Not if the petition is based on the premise that Mrs. Carter's claim is baseless," Hale said. 2 months ago, an application was submitted to support refinancing of the property. Attached to that application was an ownership schedule omitting Mrs. Carter entirely. Judge Collins looked up. "Submitted by whom?" Hale glanced once at Nathan, then at Mercer. "By Whitmore Residential Holdings, with Mr. Nathan Whitmore listed as authorized signatory." The room tightened. Emily felt it, a collective intake of breath dressed up as silence. Nathan finally spoke, his voice low. It was a clerical oversight. The words sounded small after so many years of sounding powerful. Judge Collins folded her hands. A clerical oversight involving a 12,000 square foot residence, a multi-million-dollar refinancing, and the omission of a recorded co-owner? Nathan swallowed. For the first time, Emily saw not the man who had left her, not the man who had pitted her, not the man who had let others call her undeserving while he sat comfortably beside them. She saw the man from the kitchen again, frightened by numbers, cornered by pride, waiting for someone else to make the consequences disappear. Only this time, Emily was not reaching for her checkbook. This time, she simply sat down and let the truth remain exactly where it was. Robert Hale's statement hung over the room with the dull weight of something that could not be polished away. Nathan's face had gone still again, but it was not the stillness of control. It was the stillness of a man standing in front of a locked safe, realizing the combination had always belonged to someone else. Vanessa turned toward him with a question forming behind her eyes, one she was too proud to ask aloud in front of strangers. Emily knew that look. She had worn it herself years ago, in the early days when Nathan's explanations came wrapped in charm and fatigue, when every inconsistency could be softened by his hand at the small of her back and his voice telling her she worried too much. There are women who discover betrayal all at once, with a message, a receipt, a photograph, a door left half open at the wrong time. Emily had discovered hers in inches. A dinner Nathan said was with investors, though the restaurant called the next day to thank him and Vanessa for celebrating. A perfume on his coat that did not belong to any room in their house. A charge from a boutique hotel in Manhattan when he was supposedly in Boston. Each detail was small enough to be dismissed, and that was the cruelty of it. Lies do not always arrive as monsters. Sometimes they arrive as calendar conflicts and make you feel foolish for noticing. Back then, Vanessa Blake had been introduced as a consultant helping Nathan rebrand one of his development projects. She was bright, confident, quick with compliments that sounded warm until Emily listened closely. "You are so lucky you do not have to worry about all this strategy," Vanessa had said once at a dinner party, her smile glittering above a glass of sparkling water. "I would be exhausted just being decorative." Nathan had laughed too quickly, then touched Emily's knee under the table as if affection could erase humiliation. Emily had smiled because the room expected it. That was the first skill she learned in the Whitmore family, how to bleed invisibly into expensive napkins. When the affair became impossible to deny, Nathan did not apologize first. He explained. He said the marriage had grown quiet. He said Emily had become distant. He said Vanessa understood the pressure he was under. He said many things, all arranged carefully around the empty space where accountability should have been. Patricia had called 2 days later, her voice heavy with disappointment that somehow belonged to Emily. "Marriage to a man like Nathan requires stamina," she had said. "Some women are simply not built for that level of life." That level of life. As though fidelity were an advanced sport and Emily had failed to train properly. In the present, Patricia sat 2 rows behind her son, staring at Robert Hale with a tight expression that suggested memory had become inconvenient. Judge Collins turned a page in the certified record. "Mr. Hale, do you have documentation showing the source of the funds used to cure the default?" Hale nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Bank wire confirmation from Mrs. Carter Whitmore's inheritance account, escrow receipt, and correspondence from the lender confirming the cure." Mercer stood before Hale could hand anything over. "Your Honor, we need time to review these materials." Judge Collins gave him a look that had likely ended many performances before breakfast. "You filed a petition asking this court to remove Mrs. Carter from a property record. The possibility that she was on that record should not be surprising." Somewhere behind Nathan, a man coughed into his fist. Vanessa stared at the table, her color rising. Emily should have felt vindicated. Instead, what rose in her was grief, clean and old. Not for Nathan. That had ended long before the divorce papers. She grieved the younger version of herself who had sat in Robert Hale's office believing a signature could protect love, not understanding that it was protecting her from the day love would be used as evidence against her. Nathan finally stood. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Mercer turned sharply. "Nathan." But Nathan had already stepped into the open. His voice was controlled, though thinner than before. There was no intent to mislead the court. The refinancing schedule was prepared by staff. I did not personally review every line. It was beautifully Nathan, Emily thought. Responsibility diluted until it became mist. Judge Collins rested her pen beside the deed. Did you know Mrs. Carter was listed as co-owner on the recorded deed? Nathan looked at the judge, then at Hale, then finally at Emily. For the first time, he seemed to understand that every exit in the room led through the same answer. Yes, he said. The word was quiet, but it traveled everywhere. Vanessa's head turned toward him. Patricia's lips parted. Charles Whitmore stared at the floor. Judge Collins continued. Did you disclose that fact to your current wife before pursuing refinancing or this petition? Nathan's silence answered first. Then he said, I believed it had been resolved. That is not what I asked. His shoulders lowered by a fraction. No. Vanessa let out a soft breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Emily watched her absorb the shape of her own position, not as the victorious new wife claiming a family home, but as another woman standing inside Nathan's edited reality. For one brief second, Emily almost pitied her. Almost. Compassion had limits, especially when someone had spent the morning calling you undeserving. Judge Collins looked back to the certified copy. This court is not prepared to remove a recorded owner based on assumptions, omissions, or family expectations. We will address the attempted filing, the refinancing materials, and the validity of any claimed waiver. Mercer's posture stiffened. Nathan sat down slowly. Vanessa did not look at him again. Emily remained still, but inside her, something long clenched began to open. Not forgiveness. Not victory. Something quieter and more useful. The understanding that she had not imagined the room tilting against her all those years. It had tilted, and now, at last, the floor was leveling beneath her feet. Judge Collins called a 15-minute recess, and the sound that moved through the courtroom was not relief. It was the uneasy rustle of people recalculating who they should stand beside. The bailiff announced. The break. The judge disappeared through the side door, and suddenly everyone was allowed to breathe again, though most of the Whitmores seemed to have forgotten how. Emily remained seated while Robert Hale gathered the certified copies into a neat stack, his fingers moving with the careful patience of a man who had spent his career trusting paper more than promises. Across the aisle, Mercer bent close to Nathan, speaking in a tight whisper that turned Nathan's face harder with every sentence. Vanessa stood abruptly, the legs of her chair scraping against the floor. The sound made several people look over. She noticed, composed herself, and walked toward the hallway with her chin lifted, but the performance had cracks now. Emily could see them in the white grip around her purse, in the way she avoided Patricia's eyes, in the way she did not wait for Nathan to follow. Nathan did follow, because men like Nathan always followed the person whose disappointment threatened their comfort most immediately. Patricia rose next, smoothing her skirt as if dignity could be pressed back into place by hand. She passed Emily without looking at her, but Charles Whitmore paused. For one strange second, Emily thought he might speak. He looked older than he had that morning, the lines around his mouth deeper, his shoulders less certain beneath his navy blazer. Emily, he said quietly. Her name sounded foreign in his voice. Not unwelcome. Exactly, just unused. She waited. Charles glanced toward the hallway where his wife had gone. I did not know the details. It was not an apology. It was a smaller thing, the kind of sentence powerful people offer when they want credit for approaching remorse without paying the full price of it. Emily looked at him and remembered every dinner at Briar Lane where he had asked Nathan about markets, deals, projections, and never once asked her about the work she had postponed to make his son's life easier. You knew enough not to ask, she said. Charles lowered his eyes. For once, he had no polished answer. He walked away, leaving behind the faint smell of aftershave and old money, which, Emily had learned, often smelled like denial with better tailoring. Robert Hale sat beside her again. You handled that well, he said. Emily let out a breath that almost became a laugh. I did not feel like I handled anything. I felt like I was watching a version of myself from very far away. Hale nodded. That happens when the truth finally enters a room where it has been excluded too long. Emily looked toward the judge's empty bench. The courtroom without Judge Collins felt less official, but not less heavy. Why did you keep the file? She asked. Hale's eyes softened behind his glasses. Because your father's money saved that property, and because when a young woman signs away the last thing her father left her to protect her husband's family home, somebody in the room should have the decency to remember it correctly. The words landed gently, which somehow made them harder to bear. Emily turned her face toward the windows. The rain had slowed, leaving silver trails across the glass. 5 years earlier, after the divorce, she had gone to the county clerk's office only once. She had stood in line behind contractors, retirees, and a man arguing about a permit for a backyard deck. She had not known what she was looking for. She only knew that something inside her refused to accept Nathan's clean version of their ending. When the clerk slid the property index across the counter and pointed to her name, Emily had stared at it until the letters blurred. Not because she wanted the house back. At that point, Briar Lane felt less like a home than a beautifully staged crime scene where everyone had agreed not to mention the missing years of her life. But seeing her name there had done something no settlement check, no friend's reassurance, no late-night pep talk could do. It confirmed she had not imagined her contribution. She had not invented her sacrifice to make herself feel less disposable. The record remembered. After that, she had not rushed to court. She had built a life first. A modest apartment in Stamford with warm lamps instead of chandeliers. A consulting job that became her own small property research firm. Mornings at a diner where the waitress knew her order. Quiet Sundays without Patricia's judgment folded into the napkins. Peace, she discovered, was not dramatic. It was groceries, clean sheets, paid bills, and a phone that did not make her stomach tighten every time it lit up. Then, 2 months ago, the letter from the title company arrived, asking her to confirm release of interest for a refinancing package she had never approved. That was when peace changed shape. It stopped being silence and became a boundary. In the courthouse hallway, Nathan's voice rose for the first time that day, muffled but sharp behind the heavy doors. Vanessa answered, colder, clearer. Emily could not make out every word, but she heard her own name once, then the phrase, "You should have told me." Hale looked toward the hallway, then back at Emily. They are learning what happens when a lie has more than one audience. Emily reached into her handbag and touched the old house key. She had carried it not because she wanted entry, but because she needed to remember that leaving a place did not mean surrendering the truth about how she had kept it standing. When the bailiff called everyone back, Emily rose before Nathan returned. This time, when she stood at her table, the empty chair beside her was no longer empty. And across the aisle, Nathan walked in looking not like a man defending a home, but like a man finally trapped inside the story he had written for someone else. When Judge Collins returned, the courtroom rose with a different kind of obedience. Earlier, the Whitmores had stood as people expecting the law to confirm what privilege had already promised them. Now they stood like passengers hearing a strange noise from the engine at 30,000 feet. Emily noticed everything because tension sharpened the room into details. The tiny crease between Vanessa's eyebrows, the way Mercer kept his thumb pressed against the edge of his legal pad, the way Nathan avoided the certified deed as if paper could accuse him by proximity. Judge Collins sat, adjusted her glasses, and looked first at Emily, then at Nathan. "We are back on the record." The clerk's keys clicked softly. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the windows gray and clean. "Mr. Mercer," the judge said, "before I hear further argument, I want a clear answer. Is your client disputing the authenticity of the recorded deed?" Mercer stood with the stiffness of a man stepping around a hole he had not expected in the floor. "Your Honor, at this time, we are not prepared to dispute that the document was recorded." That was not my question. Mercer's face held, but only because years of billing by the hour had trained it to survive humiliation. "No, Your Honor, we are not disputing authenticity at this time." The words "at this time" sounded like a life raft made of tissue paper. Judge Collins turned to Robert Hale. "And the supporting wire documentation?" Hale passed the documents through the clerk. "Certified copies, Your Honor." The wire originated from an account held solely in Mrs. Carter Whitmore's name, funded by the sale of inherited property located in New Haven. The amount transferred was $486,300, applied through escrow to cure the default connected to the Briar Lane property. The exact number struck Emily harder than she expected, not because she had forgotten it, but because hearing it spoken aloud in court gave weight to a sacrifice that had been treated for years like a marital footnote. $486,300. Her father's apartment. His kitchen table with the burn mark near the edge. The narrow hallway lined with framed school photos from students who still sent Christmas cards after he retired. The view of a brick wall across the alley that somehow turned gold every evening when the sun hit it just right. She had traded all of that to save a house, where Patricia later told guests Emily had never really understood how to belong. Judge Collins reviewed the wire confirmation, then looked toward Nathan. "Mr. Whitmore, did you benefit from these funds?" Nathan stood slowly. His chair made no sound, which seemed unfair. Some moments deserved a scrape. "Yes, Your Honor." "Did those funds prevent further action against the Briar Lane property?" Mercer shifted. "Your Honor, the financial circumstances were more complex than a single transfer." The judge did not look away from Nathan. "Mr. Whitmore may answer." Nathan swallowed. "Yes." Vanessa's face tightened, not with sympathy, but with the dawning understanding that she had been defending a story even she had not been trusted to read. Patricia stared straight ahead, her expression carved from the same stone as the house she claimed by blood. Emily wondered whether Patricia was remembering the spring gala 2 months after the default was cured, when she had praised Nathan in front of donors for his remarkable steadiness under pressure. Emily had stood beside the dessert table that night, wearing a pale blue dress Nathan chose because it was tasteful, while people congratulated him for saving the family's reputation from a crisis they never knew existed. No one asked why Emily's eyes looked hollow in every photograph. No one asked the wallpaper how it holds up the room. Judge Collins turned another page. "Mr. Whitmore, did you ever inform your current wife that Mrs. Carter remained a recorded co-owner?" Nathan looked toward Vanessa. That was a mistake. The answer was already in her face. "No, Your Honor." Vanessa gave a small, disbelieving breath and looked away. For a moment, the courtroom saw the glamour fall from her like a coat slipping off a chair. She was still beautiful, still carefully dressed, still sitting beside wealth, but certainty had left her. Without certainty, arrogance looked surprisingly lonely. Mercer tried to recover. "Your Honor, whatever omissions may have occurred in private discussions, this does not change the fact that Mrs. Carter abandoned the property for 5 years." Emily stood before Hale could stop her. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "I left the house, Mr. Mercer. I did not abandon the truth." The room went still again. Judge Collins looked at her, not unkindly. "Mrs. Carter, you will have an opportunity to testify if necessary." "I understand, Your Honor." Emily sat. Her hands trembled once beneath the table, then steadied. Nathan finally turned toward her, and something old passed between them. Not love, not hatred, but recognition. He knew that sentence had not been for Mercer. It had been for him. Hale rose. "Your Honor, we request that the petition to remove Mrs. Carter's interest be denied, that any pending refinancing based on incomplete ownership schedules be stayed, and that the court preserve the status quo until a proper accounting can be conducted." Mercer objected, but weakly now. The structure of his argument had not collapsed all at once. It had been dismantled by signatures, wire receipts, dates, and the terrible inconvenience of a woman who had kept breathing long enough to return with records. Judge Collins folded her hands. "I am prepared to rule on the petition." Nathan's shoulders lowered. Vanessa closed her eyes for half a second. Patricia gripped Charles's sleeve. Emily looked at the judge's bench and felt no triumph rushing toward her, only a quiet, almost frightening calm. For 5 years, people had told her moving on meant forgetting. But moving on, she now understood, was not the same as letting other people lie about where you had been. Judge Collins did not rush the ruling, and somehow that made the room feel smaller. She looked down at the certified deed, then at the wire records, then at the petition Mercer had filed with such confidence only an hour earlier. Paper moved beneath her hands with a dry whisper, each page turning like another door closing behind Nathan. Emily sat still, but inside her chest, her heart was moving too quickly, as if it had not yet received the news that she no longer needed to brace for impact. Across the aisle, Nathan stared straight ahead. Vanessa had shifted her chair 2 inches away from him. It was such a small movement that no one else may have noticed, but Emily did. Marriage, she had learned, often announced its fractures in inches before it ever used words. Patricia's hand rested over her pearls, fingers pressed tightly at her throat, not in fear for Emily, not even shame, but something closer to offense. The world had failed to obey the family script, and Patricia Whitmore had never tolerated poor service from reality. Judge Collins finally lifted her eyes. The petition before this court seeks to remove Mrs. Carter's recorded interest in the property at 18 Briar Lane. Based on the certified deed, the supporting financial records, and Mr. Whitmore's own acknowledgement that he was aware of Mrs. Carter's recorded ownership, the petition is denied. The sentence entered the room cleanly. No one cried out. No one objected at first. The words simply landed, and all the expensive certainty around Nathan seemed to collapse without making a sound. Denied. Emily had imagined that word for weeks, sometimes in the middle of the night when doubt crept in through the quiet corners of her apartment. She had imagined it as a door opening, as applause, as vindication bright enough to warm every cold place the Whitmores had left inside her. But in reality, it felt calmer than that. It felt like standing on solid ground after years of being told the floor beneath her was imaginary. Judge Collins continued. Furthermore, any refinancing, transfer, encumbrance, or title action involving the Briar Lane property shall be stayed pending a full accounting and proper notice to all recorded owners. Counsel will submit a proposed order within 7 days. Mercer rose halfway. Your Honor, may we request clarification regarding the scope of the stay? The scope is exactly what I said, Mr. Mercer. No movement on the property without proper disclosure and consent or further order of this court. Mercer sat down slowly. Vanessa turned toward Nathan then, and although her voice remained low, every syllable carried. You let me sit here and say those things. Nathan looked at her, but he did not have an answer ready. That, more than anything, seemed to frighten him. Nathan always had answers. They were not always true, but they arrived promptly, polished and shaped for the room. Now he had only silence, and silence did not suit him. Vanessa's face flushed, not with embarrassment alone, but with the realization that her cruelty had been sponsored by incomplete information. Emily did not rescue her from it. Some lessons needed to sit with the person who earned them. Patricia leaned toward Charles and whispered something fierce behind her hand. Charles did not respond. He was watching Emily with a tired expression that might have been regret if regret had learned better posture. Judge Collins looked toward Emily. Mrs. Carter, this ruling does not determine every financial issue between the parties. It does, however, preserve your recorded interest and prevents its removal through this petition. Do you understand? Emily stood. The room seemed to tilt toward her again, but this time it did not feel hungry. It felt attentive. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Her voice did not break. That surprised her. For years, she had thought strength would feel like fire. Instead, it felt like speaking clearly while everyone who underestimated you learned to listen. Nathan's eyes found hers. There was something pleading in them now, something almost familiar. It was the same look from the kitchen, the same silent request he had made years ago when he needed her money, her loyalty, her protection from his own consequences. Only now, there was no snow outside, no marriage to save, no frightened young wife standing barefoot on marble and mistaking his need for love. There was only Emily Carter in a Connecticut courtroom, wearing a navy dress and holding the truth with both hands. Judge Collins gave the final instructions, scheduled the next conference, and dismissed the matter for the day. Chairs moved. Voices returned in cautious fragments. The Whitmore side of the room rose slowly, like people leaving a funeral for a version of themselves they had enjoyed being. Emily placed the old house key back into her handbag. Robert Hale touched the edge of the certified deed and slid it carefully into his folder. You did not come for the house, he said quietly. Emily looked toward the aisle where Nathan stood frozen between his mother and his new wife, surrounded by everything he had tried to protect except his integrity. No, she said. I came because they kept calling it theirs. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled of wet coats, coffee from a vending machine, and the particular exhaustion that settles over public buildings after people have spent the morning trying to make private failures sound procedural. Emily stepped out beside Robert Hale, holding her handbag close, while the courthouse lights hummed overhead with bureaucratic indifference. Behind her, the Whitmores emerged in fragments rather than as a family. Patricia came first, her mouth set in a line so thin it nearly disappeared. Charles followed, slower, one hand in his pocket, his face turned toward the floor. Vanessa walked several feet ahead of Nathan, her heels striking the tile with sharp, controlled clicks. Nathan came last. For once, no one seemed to know where to place him. Not at the center, not at the front, not safely behind money and lawyers. He looked oddly unfinished without everyone's certainty arranged around him. Emily and Hale stopped near a tall window overlooking the courthouse steps. The rain had left the stone slick and shining, and cars moved slowly along the street below, tires whispering through shallow puddles. Hale tucked the certified copies into his leather folder. The next phase will be less dramatic, he said. Accounting, disclosures, negotiations. Necessary work, not theater. Emily gave a small, tired smile. That sounds almost peaceful. Do not get too optimistic. Lawyers are still involved. She almost laughed, and the sound surprised her. It was small, but real, a human thing returning after hours of sitting perfectly still. Then she heard Nathan say her name. Not loudly, not with command, just enough to reach her. Hale glanced at her, but did not interfere. Emily turned. Nathan stood 10 feet away, hands at his sides, his tie loosened by half an inch, which for Nathan Whitmore was practically a public breakdown. Vanessa had stopped near the elevator, watching him with an expression no longer glamorous, no longer triumphant, only coldly awake. Patricia waited farther back, pretending not to listen with the intensity of someone listening to every syllable. Emily, Nathan said again. Can we speak for a moment? Hale's face did not change. I will be by the clerk's office. He walked away, leaving Emily in a quiet pocket of hallway with the man who had once made her believe love required disappearing. Nathan took one step closer, then stopped, perhaps remembering that distance could also be a boundary. I did not think it would go like that, he said. Emily studied him. 5 years ago, those words would have pulled her toward explanation. She would have softened them, corrected the room around them, helped him find a version of events where he was careless but not cruel, ashamed but not dishonest. That was how she had loved him, by editing the sharpness out of his choices until she was the one bleeding from the cuts. No, she said. You thought I would be embarrassed enough to leave. He looked down. I thought the divorce settled everything. You hoped exhaustion settled what the documents did not. The sentence was calm, and that made it more devastating. Nathan inhaled, then let the breath go slowly. I should have told Vanessa. Emily looked past him to where Vanessa stood by the elevator, arms folded, face turned slightly away as though she could refuse the humiliation by angling herself out of it. That is between you and your wife. The word wife rested between them without bitterness. Emily was surprised by that too. There had been a time when imagining Vanessa with Nathan's name felt like swallowing glass. Now it felt like observing bad weather from inside a sturdy building. Nathan rubbed one hand across his jaw. My mother did not know. Not really. Emily's eyes returned to his. Your mother knew I was useful when you needed saving. She only forgot when it was time to give me credit. He flinched then, not dramatically, but enough. Good, Emily thought, and immediately felt no guilt for thinking it. Some truths are not violence. They are overdue invoices. I was under pressure, Nathan said, and the old language tried to reassemble itself. Pressure, complexity, timing. A whole vocabulary designed to make betrayal sound like a scheduling issue. Emily shook her head once. So was I? I was under pressure when I sold my father's apartment. I was under pressure when your lawyers rushed me through a settlement. I was under pressure when your family treated my silence like proof that I had never mattered. The difference is, Nathan, I stopped using pressure as an excuse to hurt people. His face changed. For a moment, she saw grief there, or maybe only the fear of consequences dressed in softer clothing. It no longer mattered. What do you want? He asked quietly. Emily looked toward the courthouse doors, where pale afternoon light spilled across the floor. Once, she would have wanted an apology large enough to rebuild the years. Now she knew no apology could do that. An accounting, she said. Full disclosure. A legal resolution that reflects what I contributed. And I want your family to stop telling people I tried to take something that was never mine. Nathan nodded slowly. And the house. Emily touched the brass clasp of her handbag, feeling the old key inside. I do not want to live in Briar Lane. I outgrew that house the day I walked out of it. Vanessa entered the elevator without waiting for him. The doors closed between them with a soft metallic sigh. Nathan watched them shut, then looked back at Emily, and for the first time since she had known him, he seemed smaller than his name. Emily felt no rush of pity, only release. She turned toward the stairs, leaving him beneath the fluorescent lights, surrounded by the ruins of a story that had finally stopped protecting him. By the time Emily reached the courthouse steps, the rain had thinned into a pale mist that floated over the street and softened the hard edges of the afternoon. Robert Hale stood beside her beneath the stone overhang, fastening his overcoat with slow, careful fingers. Cars rolled past on the wet road, their headlights reflected in long white streaks across the pavement. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. There are victories that make noise, and there are victories that simply remove a weight you had grown so used to carrying that your shoulders do not immediately understand they are free. Emily felt the second kind. The courthouse doors opened behind them, and she knew without turning that Nathan had come out. Some presences did not need sound. They arrived as memory first. Hale glanced over his shoulder, then looked back at Emily. "I will call you tomorrow about the order," he said. "Go home. Eat something that did not come from a vending machine. Courts are hard enough without letting bad coffee finish the job." Emily smiled faintly. "Thank you, Robert." He gave a small nod and walked toward the parking lot, leaving her at the top of the steps with the gray sky above her and the old house key still resting in her handbag like a relic from a country she no longer lived in. Nathan stopped a few feet away. He did not come too close this time. Perhaps he had finally learned that not every space in front of a woman was his to occupy. "Emily," he said, and her name sounded different now, stripped of strategy. She turned. He looked tired in the unforgiving daylight, his suit still perfect, his face not. Behind him, through the glass doors, Patricia and Charles were waiting near the lobby, and Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. "I never meant for them to talk to you that way," he said. Emily looked at him for a long moment. "You sat beside them while they did." The answer left him with nowhere graceful to stand. He looked toward the street, then back at her. "I was ashamed." It was the first honest thing he had said all day, and maybe in many years. Emily accepted it without softening it. Shame, she had learned, was not repentance. Shame was often only pride after it had been caught without its coat. "You should have been," she said. Nathan nodded once, as if the words had cost him something he could not afford but had to pay anyway. "What happens now?" he asked. "The lawyers do what lawyers do. Slowly, expensively, and with too much paper." A shadow of a smile moved across his face, but it did not survive. Emily looked down the courthouse steps at the wet sidewalk, at a woman opening an umbrella for her child, at a delivery truck backing carefully into an alley, at ordinary life continuing with no concern for the collapse of the Whitmore family mythology. "I am not moving back into Briar Lane," she said. "I am not interested in sitting in those rooms waiting for ghosts to apologize. The house can be sold, or you can buy out my interest properly, with full accounting and no more convenient omissions." Nathan's throat moved. That house was supposed to stay in the family. Emily almost laughed, but there was too much history in the sentence to make it funny. "Then your family should have protected it without my father's money." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were wet, though no tears fell. She did not look away, and she did not reach for him. That was how she knew she was finally free. Once, his sadness would have become her assignment. Today it remained his. "I am sorry," he said. The words arrived late, thin and insufficient, but they arrived. Emily let them stand between them without trying to turn them into more than they were. "I believe you are sorry now," she said. "But I needed truth back then. Not now, when the record forced it from you." A gust of wind lifted the ends of her hair and carried the damp scent of October leaves up from the curb. For a second, she saw Briar Lane as it had once been, snow at the windows, light in the kitchen, Nathan's hand around hers in a parking lot after signing the deed. Then the image faded, not painfully, but naturally, like a photograph finally put back in a drawer. "Emily," Nathan said, softer. "Did you ever love that house?" She thought about it. The grand staircase, the cold marble, the rooms too large for honest conversation. The kitchen where she had made coffee before dawn. The library where she had cried quietly so Patricia would not hear. The driveway she had walked down with 2 suitcases and a heart so tired it felt older than her body. "No," she said at last. "I loved the life I thought we were building inside it. That was different." Nathan had no answer. Good. Some sentences did not need to be met. They needed to be carried. Emily stepped down onto the first stair. "Goodbye, Nathan." He did not stop her. This time, when she walked away from him, her hands were not shaking. She crossed the wet sidewalk, opened her car door, and placed her handbag on the passenger seat. Before starting the engine, she took out the old key and held it in her palm. It was heavier than it should have been, brass worn smooth by years of use and memory. Then she placed it in the glove compartment, closed it, and drove out of the courthouse parking lot toward Stamford, toward her small apartment with warm lamps, paid bills, clean sheets, and a life that no one else could rename. Weeks later, the accounting began. The refinancing was withdrawn. The Whitmores stopped hosting charity dinners at Briar Lane while attorneys reviewed the numbers they had once assumed would never be questioned. Vanessa moved into a hotel for a while, then into silence. Patricia sent no apology, which was generous of her, because Emily had no desire to frame one. Nathan's lawyers eventually proposed a buyout, this time with Emily's attorney, accountant, and Robert Hale reviewing every comma. The amount was fair, not because Nathan became noble, but because documentation makes nobility less necessary. On the morning the agreement closed, Emily did not celebrate with champagne or a dramatic speech. She went to the diner near her office, ordered pancakes with blueberries, and watched sunlight spill across the counter. Her phone buzzed with a message from Hale. Funds received. Fully recorded. Clean. Emily read the word twice. Clean. This time it did not belong to Nathan, or his family, or any house with too many rooms and too little honesty. It belonged to her. She paid her check, left a 20% tip, and stepped outside into a clear Connecticut morning. The air smelled of coffee, wet pavement, and something almost like spring, even though winter was coming. For years, they had tried to reduce her to a mistake in someone else's story, a former wife, a quiet woman, a name they could speak over and file around. But records have a stubborn dignity when people do not. Ink remains, dates remain, signatures remain, and sometimes, after everyone has finished claiming you deserved nothing, the truth waits patiently on county paper until you are strong enough to let it speak. 6 months after the agreement closed, Emily moved her office out of the shared workspace above the insurance agency and into a narrow brick building on Bedford Street, 3 blocks from the Stamford train station. It was not grand. The floors sloped slightly near the back wall. The heating system made thoughtful clanking sounds every morning at 7:15, and the front windows rattled whenever a delivery truck passed too close to the curb. But the lease had her name on it. The bank account had her name on it. The brass plaque beside the door read Carter Property Research, and every time Emily unlocked that door, she felt a quiet satisfaction no marble foyer at Briar Lane had ever given her. Her work was not glamorous in the way people at charity galas understood glamour. She reviewed property records, traced title histories, found old liens hiding in forgotten filings, and helped clients understand what they owned before someone with better shoes convinced them they owned nothing. Some were widows. Some were adult children settling estates. Some were divorced women who arrived with folders pressed to their chests and apologies already forming on their lips, as if needing clarity made them difficult. Emily never rushed them. She gave them coffee, pointed to the chair across from her desk, and said the same thing every time. Paper first. Panic later. It became something of a rule in the office, printed eventually on a small card beside the reception desk because her assistant, Maribel, said people needed hope they could fit in a purse. Emily had met Maribel at the county clerk's office, where the younger woman was helping her aunt untangle a property tax issue after a messy probate case. Maribel was 26, sharp-eyed, practical, and allergic to nonsense, which made her nearly overqualified for civilization. She could spot an incomplete filing from across a room and had no patience for people who called women emotional while misplacing their own documents. Together, they built the business slowly, not with miracles, with invoices, referrals, long afternoons at archive terminals, and the unromantic dignity of doing work correctly. One Friday in April, a woman named Diane Keller came in wearing a raincoat too thin for the weather and carrying a plastic grocery bag full of papers. Her husband had died the previous year, she explained, and her stepsons were insisting the lake cabin in Vermont had never belonged to her, even though she had paid the mortgage for 14 years. As Diane spoke, her voice kept shrinking, as though every sentence needed permission to exist. Emily listened without interrupting. When Diane finally stopped, embarrassed by her own tears, Emily slid a box of tissues across the desk and opened the first folder. Let us see what the record remembers, she said. 2 hours later, they found Diane's name on a refinance document no one in the family had mentioned. Not a final answer, not yet, but a door. Diane stared at the screen as if it were speaking a language she had almost forgotten she knew. They told me I was being greedy, she whispered. Emily felt the old courtroom rise inside her. Vanessa's cream dress, Nathan's silence, Patricia's pearls, Judge Collins reading the deed like scripture for the exhausted. Greedy people usually hide records, Emily said gently. Careful people read them. Diane laughed through her tears, and something in Emily settled deeper into place. That was the part no one tells you about justice. Sometimes the first victory does not end the story. It gives you a skill, and then life sends other people to your door carrying their own versions of the same wound. That evening, after Diane left with copies neatly labeled in a folder instead of crumpled inside a grocery bag, Emily stayed late to finish notes. Outside, spring rain darkened the sidewalks. Inside, her desk lamp cast a warm circle over the wood, and the office smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and the lemon cleaner Maribel used with unnecessary aggression. Emily's phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. It was Nathan. I heard about your firm. I am glad you are doing well. For a long moment, she simply looked at the words. There was a time when a message from him could rearrange her entire nervous system, when his attention felt like weather and she dressed her mood accordingly. Now the screen was just a screen. A small rectangle of light made by a man who no longer had keys to any room inside her. She did not answer immediately. She finished Diane's file, locked the cabinet, watered the stubborn little plant on the windowsill, and turned off the lamp. Only then did she pick up the phone again. She typed, "Thank you. I hope you are honest with the next person before a court has to help you." She read it once, deleted the second sentence, and sent only the first 2 words. Not because he deserved tenderness, because she deserved peace. Outside, she stepped into the rain beneath a black umbrella and walked toward the parking garage. Across the street, the windows of her office reflected back at her, warm and gold against the wet evening. Her name was small on the door, almost modest from that distance. But it was there, clear, recorded, undeniable. And for the first time in years, Emily understood that a signature was more than proof of ownership. Sometimes it was proof that a woman had been present in her own life all along, even when everyone else had tried to write her out.